My name is Clara Bennett, and I was 16 when my father left me standing outside his own wedding. I can still feel the cold marble under my shoes and the way the heavy wooden doors shut in my face. The music started inside a string quartet playing a soft waltz, and I remember thinking how strange it was that such a beautiful sound could come from such a cruel moment. My father, David Bennett, smiled nervously at me as guests filled the golden lit hall. "Stay here for a moment, sweetheart," he said, adjusting his tie. His fiancée, Vanessa, stood beside him glowing in her white gown, her diamond earrings catching every ray of light. She glanced at me, her eyes flicking down at my simple blue dress, the one my father had chosen himself, and then looked away like I was an inconvenience. I thought I'd follow him inside in just a second, but when the music swelled and the doors closed, he was gone. Just like that. I stood in the hallway clutching the bouquet he had handed me, the stems shaking in my palm. I waited, thinking maybe he would come back. Maybe there'd been a misunderstanding. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Guests walked by me smiling politely, assuming I was a distant cousin. One whispered, "Poor thing, she must be nervous." But I wasn't nervous. I was frozen. Through the narrow crack between the doors, I saw my father take Vanessa's hands, his face calm and proud. I saw the minister raise his book. I saw everyone rise for their vows. And I saw my father look at his bride like she was the only person in the world. That was when I realized he hadn't forgotten me. He had chosen to leave me there. I wasn't part of his new picture-perfect family. I didn't fit beside the model wife the stepchildren flown in from private schools, or the photographers he'd hired to capture every flawless moment. I was a flaw, something to be hidden outside the frame. When a hotel security guard approached, his tone was kind but firm. "Miss, you can't stand here," he said. "The ceremony's private." I nodded, not trusting my voice, and walked down the corridor toward the exit. The laughter from inside echoed behind me, each sound sharper than the last. Outside, the California sun burned against my skin, but I felt nothing, just the hollow ache where my father's promise used to live. A taxi driver loading luggage nearby asked, "You lost kid?" I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out. Instead, I just stared at the grand doors one last time. They stayed closed. In that silence, I understood something I wasn't ready to accept. Sometimes abandonment doesn't happen in the dark or by strangers. Sometimes it happens in daylight in front of witnesses while violins play and no one notices the child left standing in the hallway. Before the wedding and before everything that followed, my father used to be my favorite person in the world. When I think of him now, I force myself to remember the man he was before the money, before Vanessa, before appearances mattered more than love. Back then, he was simply Dad, the man who smelled like coffee and old books, who read to me every night until I fell asleep. He was a university professor who loved art and literature, and he used to bring me to his campus on weekends when Mom was busy painting in her studio. I'd sit in the back of his lecture hall while he spoke to his students about the meaning of beauty, his voice calm and patient. Beauty, he once said, isn't in perfection. It's in truth. I remember those words because they no longer fit the man he became. When I was 12, my mother Margaret was diagnosed with cancer. I still see flashes of her standing by the window, her hair tied up in a scarf, her smile brave even when her hands trembled. She was an artist who painted with watercolors, always telling me life is softer if you choose the right colors. After she died, our house turned gray. My father cried only once that I ever saw at the funeral. After that, he became silent, as if grief had locked his voice away somewhere he couldn't reach. For a while, it was just the two of us against the world. We ate takeout on the couch, watched old movies, and tried to laugh at moments that weren't funny. I believed that losing Mom had made us stronger. I used to sit at his desk while he graded papers, pretending to be his assistant. Sometimes he'd look at me and smile sadly, saying, "You're the only thing that keeps me going, Clara." I believed him with all my heart. But grief has a way of reshaping people. A year after Mom's death, I started noticing small changes. His new suits, the gym membership, the cologne that smelled like ambition instead of comfort. He began to speak about moving forward, about how appearances mattered. I didn't understand it then, but he wasn't just rebuilding. He was reinventing himself. He started spending less time at home and more at social events. There were dinners with colleagues that he didn't invite me to, phone calls he'd take in another room. I'd wait for him to return pretending to read, though my eyes never left the clock. When he was home, he'd be polite, distracted a man whose mind was elsewhere. The first time I heard him laugh again was on the phone. The sound startled me because it was warm, too warm, and not meant for me. That night, I peeked into his office and saw a photo on his desk, a woman with perfect hair, her smile, camera ready. Vanessa Price. I didn't know her name yet, but something in my chest tightened. My father noticed me standing there and closed the laptop. "It's late," he said, his tone sharp, defensive. I went to bed, my heart confused but hopeful. Maybe he was finally healing. Maybe he'd found someone who'd make him happy again. I didn't know that healing would soon mean erasing the life he had before her, erasing us. For the next months, I'd hear him talk about her as though she were a miracle. "She makes me feel alive again," he said once, his eyes shining in a way that made me ache. I wanted to be happy for him. I wanted to believe that love could save him from grief. But deep down, I felt something else, the quiet fear that his new beginning might mean my ending. I met Vanessa Price in the spring of my 14th year, and from the moment she walked through our front door, everything in my world began to tilt. She was 29, tall, polished, and surrounded by a faint perfume that smelled like money and control. My father had told me to wear something nice that evening, so I sat stiffly at the dining table in a pale dress that felt too tight, waiting for the woman who had somehow made him laugh again. When she arrived, her smile was perfect, but her eyes weren't. They skimmed over me like I was an item on a checklist. "So, this is Clara?" she said, her voice sweet but sharp, the kind of tone adults use when they've already decided something about you. My father beamed as if he'd just introduced his greatest achievement. "Isn't she beautiful?" he said proudly, but I caught the quick flicker of discomfort in Vanessa's expression before she recovered. Dinner was a performance. Vanessa spoke about charity galas and European vacations while my father nodded eagerly, a student admiring his teacher. I listened quietly, my fork untouched, feeling smaller with every passing minute. When I mentioned my mother's paintings hanging in the hallway, Vanessa glanced toward them and said, "Oh, how quaint," as if they were relics of a mistake that needed to be covered up. My father didn't correct her. Instead, he changed the subject, asking about her work with a local fashion magazine. I remember staring at his hands as he reached across the table to pour her more wine. The same hands that used to fix my school projects, the same hands that used to hold mine when crossing the street. Now they trembled slightly in her presence, not from fear, but from admiration. After that dinner, Vanessa became a fixture in our lives. She visited often, always perfectly dressed, always bringing small gifts that didn't suit me. Perfume, jewelry, expensive notebooks with golden edges. "You should think more about presentation," she once told me as she brushed imaginary lint off my sweater. "People judge before they listen." My father laughed, calling her insightful. Slowly, he began echoing her words. He stopped wearing his old cardigans and switched to tailored suits. Our cozy, cluttered home started transforming into something sterile and glossy. Mom's paintings disappeared from the walls. When I asked about them, my father said they didn't fit the new decor. He didn't see how much that sentence broke me. One evening, I overheard Vanessa talking to him in the kitchen. "She's a sweet girl," she said softly, "but she's so plain. You should think about the image we project. People will see us as a family soon." My father hesitated, then said, "She'll grow into it." They both laughed quietly, and that sound buried something inside me for good. After that night, I tried harder, better grades, better manners, dressing the way Vanessa approved. But approval never came. Whenever we were together, she would gently remind me of my shortcomings. "Sit straighter. Clara. Smile more naturally. Don't speak unless you're sure." My father never defended me. In fact, he began correcting me too, always with a calm voice that made the rejection sting even worse. It wasn't just Vanessa taking over. It was my father's slow surrender. The more he tried to fit into her glittering world, the less space there was for me. Birthdays came and went. My 16th birthday passed with a brief phone call and a promise of something special soon. I didn't know that something special would be the day he'd marry Vanessa, the day I'd learn how it feels to be invisible to the person you love most. Looking back, I realized the cracks in our family weren't sudden. They began the moment he stopped seeing me as his daughter and started seeing me as a flaw in his new masterpiece. That was when I truly began to disappear. The morning of my father's wedding felt like standing on the edge of a dream I didn't belong in. The air smelled like roses and champagne, but beneath it lingered something sour, fear maybe, or the sense that I was about to witness my own erasure. The hotel in San Diego gleamed like a movie set marble floors reflecting the crystal chandeliers above. Guests in designer clothes hurried past me all smiles and whispers. I was 16, dressed in a soft blue gown that my father had mailed to me a week before, with a note that said, "You'll look lovely in this, simple and elegant just like your mother." I wanted to believe those words, to believe he still remembered her, still remembered me. When I arrived, he was already standing with Vanessa in the grand lobby, photographers circling them like moths drawn to a flame. Vanessa's wedding dress shimmered an ocean of white silk and sequins, and my father looked younger than I'd seen him in years. His gray hair slicked back, his smile flawless. He turned toward me briefly, his eyes flickering with what I thought was pride, but later realized was hesitation. "Sweetheart," he said, touching my arm lightly, "you look beautiful. But listen, the photographers think the family shots will look more balanced if you wait until after the ceremony. You understand, right?" The words didn't sink in at first. "Wait outside?" I asked, laughing nervously. Why, Vanessa stepped closer, her perfume wrapping around me like a warning. "It's just for now, darling. You're young and we don't want you overwhelmed. It's such a big day for your father." Her tone was sugar-coated poison. My father didn't meet my eyes. "Please, Clara, it's just easier this way." Easier. The word sliced deeper than anything else he could have said. I nodded because that's what daughters do when they're desperate to please. I stepped aside, clutching the bouquet he'd given me. The music started a string quartet playing something elegant and cold. As the guests filed into the ballroom, Vanessa leaned into my father, whispering something that made him smile. Then the doors closed behind them. I stood there alone, the echo of the closing doors louder than the music. Minutes turned into hours, though the clock insisted it was only 37 minutes. I peeked through the crack of the door and saw my father holding Vanessa's hands, tears in his eyes. The priest spoke of union and family while I stood on the outside of both. My reflection in the glass doors looked like a stranger, a girl too small for the moment, too naive to understand she'd just been replaced. A wedding planner walked by and gave me a sympathetic glance. "Sweetheart, maybe wait in the lobby," she whispered gently, steering me away. I sat on a velvet chair under a chandelier that threw fractured light across my lap. Every laugh and cheer from behind those doors pierced through the air like splinters. When the ceremony ended, I stood expecting him to come find me. He didn't. The guests poured out congratulating Vanessa, snapping photos, clinking glasses. My father looked radiant beside her, one hand resting proudly on her waist. When his eyes finally met mine across the crowd, I smiled instinctively. But his smile faltered, and in that moment, I saw its shame. He turned away. I walked out of the hall before he could look back. Outside, the California sun was blinding. My phone buzzed, no messages. I called his number once, twice, then again. Straight to voicemail. I sent a text. "You forgot me." No reply. A soft wind picked up, carrying the sound of laughter from the balcony above where the wedding party was taking photos. I stood on the sidewalk, bouquet wilting in my hand, and realized that every hope I'd held onto was gone. He hadn't forgotten me. He had chosen her over me, his image over our bond. The doorman asked if I needed a taxi, and I nodded, climbing into the back seat. As the car pulled away, I looked out the window one last time. Through the open terrace doors, I could see my father posing beside his new wife, cameras flashing his arm around her waist. From where I sat, it looked perfect, too perfect. The kind of perfection that hides the ugliest truths. That was the day I learned that betrayal doesn't always roar. Sometimes it smiles for the camera while you stand outside, watching unseen, realizing you've been edited out of your own family. The taxi driver's voice broke through the ringing in my ears as the hotel disappeared behind us. "Where to, miss?" he asked gently. My mouth felt dry, my tongue heavy, so I just handed him the small note Aunt Linda had written with her address in San Diego. The man nodded and drove off, humming along with the radio, unaware that my entire world had just collapsed a few miles behind us. I stared out the window, watching palm trees blur into streaks of green and gold. I tried to cry, but no tears came, just a dull ache that pressed against my chest like a stone. My phone buzzed, and for one wild second I thought it was my father. But it was just a notification from social media photos already circulating from the wedding. There he was grinning beside Vanessa, champagne raised, captioned, "Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, a perfect union." The comments were filled with hearts and congratulations. I scrolled and scrolled until my reflection in the screen blurred with the image of them. My throat burned. I locked the phone and turned away from the sunlight. The driver glanced in the mirror. "You okay, sweetheart?" he asked. I nodded automatically, the lie too easy. "Just tired," I murmured. He didn't believe me, but he didn't push. When we reached Aunt Linda's small house on the outskirts of town, I stepped out, still clutching the wilted bouquet. The driver hesitated before starting the meter again. "Take care of yourself, kid," he said quietly. I tried to smile. "Thank you." The front porch light was on, though it was barely sunset. Aunt Linda opened the door before I could knock. She took one look at my face and said nothing, just pulled me into her arms. I felt her warmth seep into me, steady and unspoken. She smelled like vanilla and laundry detergent, nothing fancy, but it was the first real comfort I'd felt all day. "Did he—" She began softly but stopped herself. "Come inside, honey. You look frozen." Inside her living room was small but full of live family photos, crocheted blankets, the faint crackle of an old radio. She sat me down, made tea, and waited until I could breathe again. When I finally found my voice, it came out broken. "He left me outside Aunt Linda. He said it was easier that way." Her eyes darkened, but she didn't speak. She just reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I took a shaky breath. "They didn't want me in the pictures. She said I'd ruin the image." The words felt unreal, like lines from a play I hadn't agreed to perform in. Aunt Linda exhaled slowly. "People like that care more about mirrors than memories." She said, her tone firm but sad. "You did nothing wrong, Clara. He's the one who'll have to live with it." I wanted to believe her, but all I felt was the hollow ache of being unwanted. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring at the stars, replaying every detail of the day, the sound of the doors closing, the look on his face, the way he didn't come after me. Around midnight, I noticed a small envelope on top of my suitcase. It was from him, slipped inside the outer pocket. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were a few $100s and a note written in his neat handwriting. "Stay with Aunt Linda until we get back from the honeymoon. You'll understand someday." Understand what? That I was disposable. That love could be conditional, replaceable, traded for appearances. I pressed the note against my chest until the paper crumpled. For the first time that night, I cried, not out of anger, but from the quiet realization that my father had chosen a life where I didn't exist. Outside, the night was calm, but inside me, something had broken beyond repair. The days that followed blurred into a long stretch of silence. Aunt Linda tried to fill it with gentle chatter about her garden, the neighbors, and the latest church bake sale, but I barely heard her. I spent hours staring at my phone, waiting for a message that never came. The wedding photos spread online like wildfire magazine-style images of Vanessa and my father smiling under golden chandeliers, her diamond ring flashing like a warning. There was even a headline from a local lifestyle blog: "Tech entrepreneur Charles Bennett marries fashion editor in stunning ceremony." They looked like royalty. And there I was, the daughter they had airbrushed out of existence. I typed out message after message to him, long, angry ones, short, desperate ones, even a few sarcastic ones, but never hit send. What could I say that would make him remember me? One afternoon, Aunt Linda came into my room holding a cup of tea and a folded newspaper. "Honey," she said gently, "you should see this." On the second page was a photo of my father and Vanessa boarding a plane to Paris for their honeymoon. The article quoted him saying, "Family is everything." I laughed out loud, a sound so brittle that even I didn't recognize it. "Family!" I repeated, my voice shaking. "He doesn't even know what that word means." Aunt Linda sat beside me, her hand resting on mine. Sometimes people lose themselves chasing the life they think they deserve. The tragedy is who they step on along the way. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sad. You can't make him see what he doesn't want to. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. Deep down, I knew she was right. Over the next few months, I stopped checking my phone as much. I went back to school, took on part-time work at a cafe, and tried to rebuild the pieces of myself that had shattered. Aunt Linda became my anchor-steady patient, never pushing too hard. But even in moments of peace, his shadow followed me. Sometimes I'd see a man with gray hair and a suit walking down the street, and my heart would skip before I realized it wasn't him. The sound of jazz, his favorite genre, could still bring tears to my eyes. Then 6 months later, an envelope arrived in the mail addressed to me in his handwriting. My stomach twisted as I tore it open. Inside was a short letter. Clara, I hope you're doing well with Aunt Linda. Things have been hectic, but Vanessa and I are planning to visit soon. I know the wedding day was difficult, and I wish you'd stayed to celebrate. You'll understand someday why it had to be that way. Love, Dad. That phrase again. You'll understand someday. I read it over and over as if repetition could turn it into something less cruel. The envelope smelled faintly of Vanessa's perfume. Aunt Linda found me standing by the mailbox shaking. He wrote, I said, my voice barely audible. She took the letter, read it, and sighed. That's not love, sweetheart. That's guilt wrapped in excuses. I looked at her, tears burning my eyes. Why does he keep saying I'll understand someday? What is there to understand about being unwanted? Aunt Linda hesitated, then said quietly, People like your father think their mistakes look smaller if they convince others they were necessary. Her words settled heavy in the air. That night, I tore the letter into small pieces and burned them in a candle flame, watching the paper curl and blacken. It wasn't revenge, it was release. But even as the ashes drifted into the air, I whispered, I still love you, because love doesn't vanish on command. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, but necessary. I stopped expecting his calls. I stopped checking the news for glimpses of him. And in that emptiness, something unexpected began to grow, a fragile sense of independence. I wasn't healed, not yet. But I was beginning to see that his absence, painful as it was, might someday be the space where I'd learn who I truly was without him. It was almost a year later when I saw him again. I was 19, working at the cafe down by the pier, wiping down tables at closing time when the doorbell chimed. I turned, expecting a tourist who had lost their way. Instead, I froze. My father stood there, older but still impeccably dressed, his tailored suit out of place among the smell of espresso and salt air. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled, that same careful smile I remembered from the wedding. Clara, he said softly, you've grown. The sound of my name in his voice was both comforting and cruel. I stood still, rag in hand, unsure whether to run or cry. What are you doing here? I managed. Can't a father visit his daughter? He asked, stepping inside. I wanted to laugh at the irony of it. A father visiting. After all the months of silence, he thought he could just appear and everything would reset. Vanessa's in the car, he added quickly, as if her presence would somehow legitimize the visit. We were passing through and thought we'd stop. Passing through. Like I was a gas station on his way to somewhere better. I repeated the word sour on my tongue. You left me outside your wedding, Dad. I don't think we exists anymore. He looked down, his jaw tightening. That was complicated. Vanessa felt the day was already stressful and you agreed. I interrupted. You agreed to erase me. The air thickened between us. The espresso machine hissed like it could sense the tension. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. I made mistakes, Clara, but I've been trying to make things right. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. I've set up a trust fund for you, enough to pay for college. I want you to have opportunities I couldn't give before. The words stung. Money, his cure for everything. You think that fixes it? I asked, my voice rising. You think throwing cash at me makes me forget how it felt to watch you choose her over me? He flinched. It's not like that. Then what's it like? I snapped, tears filling my eyes, because from where I stood, it looked exactly like that. His voice softened, almost pleading. Vanessa's changed Clara. We both have. We want to make amends. Maybe you could come visit, spend a weekend at the house, get to know her. I laughed, but it wasn't kind. The house where you replaced me. The house with no pictures of me on the walls. I shook my head. You built a life without me. Keep it that way. He looked truly shaken for the first time, his eyes glistening. You sound just like your mother, he said quietly. I froze. Don't I, warned, but he continued. She walked away too. I tried to hold our family together, Clara, but she left before I could fix it. And now you're doing the same. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling. No, I said slowly. You pushed me away. You built a life where I didn't fit. I'm just finally choosing to stop knocking on a locked door. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. After a long silence, he placed the envelope on the counter. It's yours whether you forgive me or not, he said. But one day you'll understand why I did what I did. That cursed phrase again. Understand someday. I turned away, unable to meet his gaze. You should go, I whispered. When the bell chimed again as he left, I collapsed against the counter, shaking. Through the window, I watched as he walked back to his car. Vanessa sat in the passenger seat, sunglasses hiding her eyes. She didn't look back. As their car disappeared down the road, I realized something painful and freeing all at once. I no longer wanted his approval. For the first time in years, the ache in my chest was mixed with something new, a quiet defiance that whispered maybe I could build my own life even if he never understood. 2 weeks after that visit, a letter arrived from a law firm in Los Angeles. The envelope was thick, embossed with gold lettering that screamed wealth and authority. My hands trembled as I opened it, fearing another cruel gesture wrapped in formality. Inside was a neatly typed letter addressed to me, Miss Clara Bennett. This correspondence concerns the estate of your late mother, Margaret Hayes. Please contact our office to arrange a discussion regarding undisclosed assets and records pertaining to your guardianship. My breath caught. Guardianship assets. My mother had died when I was 8, at least that's what my father had told me. I remembered his quiet tone, the way he had held me that day, whispering, She's gone, sweetheart. She couldn't handle the world anymore. I'd believed him because grief makes children blind. Now, reading the words estate and undisclosed, I felt the ground shift beneath me. Aunt Linda's hand flew to her mouth when I showed her the letter. Your mother's lawyer, she whispered. Clara, I think it's time you learned what really happened. 2 days later, we drove to the law firm. The building was cold, modern, the kind of place where truth is sealed in envelopes. A man named Mr. Cartwright greeted us. Gray hair, kind eyes, and a tone that suggested he'd been waiting for this conversation for years. Clara, he said, folding his hands, your mother didn't pass away the way your father described. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? He sighed. After the divorce, your mother experienced a breakdown. She checked herself into a wellness clinic for treatment, hoping to regain stability before reestablishing contact with you. She wrote you letters every month for 4 years. They were returned unopened. I froze. Returned? Who sent them back? He looked at me carefully. Your father. The words hit like a physical blow. She didn't abandon you, Clara. She tried, many times. My stomach churned. So he lied. All this time. Mr. Cartwright nodded. When your mother passed 5 years ago, her will instructed us to deliver her personal journal and correspondence to you once you reached adulthood. We waited because your father refused communication. He opened a leather box and handed me a bundle of letters, each in my mother's familiar handwriting. I traced the ink with shaking fingers. The first letter began, My darling Clara, I hope one day this reaches you. Your father won't allow me to see you now, but please know I never left because I stopped loving you. I left because I couldn't survive staying. Tears blurred the words, but I kept reading. Each letter told pieces of the truth, her struggle with depression, her attempts to fight for custody, her heartbreak when every call, every visit, every plea was denied. The last letter was dated the month before her death. If he's told you I'm gone, please don't believe it. You live in me, Clara. You always will. I pressed the paper to my chest, sobbing quietly. Aunt Linda placed a hand on my back. "She never stopped trying," she whispered. My mind reeled back to all the years my father had painted her as unstable, selfish, unworthy. He'd rewritten our family's story not to protect me, but to erase her, to make himself the victim, the hero, the center. That night, I couldn't sleep. I spread the letters across Aunt Linda's kitchen table, my mother's words glowing softly under the lamp. Each one felt like a resurrection. A small piece of her voice returned to me. I found her journal tucked at the bottom of the box. Inside, she had written about the day she lost custody. "He promised me he'd keep you safe," one entry said. "But safety under his control is another kind of cage." I finally understood what she meant. My father hadn't just abandoned me at his wedding. He'd been abandoning me for years, through lies, through silence, through the slow suffocation of truth. And now, for the first time, I had proof. As dawn crept through the window, I whispered, "You tried, Mom. I know now." And in that fragile morning light, something inside me shifted from grief to resolve. I wasn't the broken girl he'd left outside the wedding hall anymore. I was her daughter, the one who would make sure the truth finally saw daylight. I didn't plan to confront him. At least, that's what I told myself on the flight to Los Angeles. But the truth was, I couldn't breathe until I did. The letters burned in my bag like evidence waiting to speak. I texted him that morning, just one line I know about Mom. He replied faster than I expected. "Let's talk." When I arrived at his glass-walled mansion, Vanessa greeted me with her usual mask of politeness. "Clara," she said, voice sweet but tight. What a surprise. I brushed past her without a word. My father was waiting in the study sunlight pouring over the polished mahogany desk. For a moment, I saw the man I used to know, the one who read me bedtime stories and built sandcastles at the beach. But then he looked up and the illusion shattered. "You've been digging," he said quietly. "Cartwright called me." I dropped the stack of letters onto his desk. "Digging? You mean finding out that my mother didn't abandon me, that she spent years trying to reach me while you made sure I never saw her?" His face tightened. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Dad? Because I have her handwriting right here telling me you sent her letters back unopened." He rose slowly. His voice calm but edged with authority, the voice that once silenced every argument. "Your mother was ill, Clara. She was unstable. I did what I had to do to protect you." "Protect me," I snapped. "You didn't protect me. You isolated me. You made me believe she didn't want me. You made me hate her." He ran a hand across his forehead. "You were too young to understand." "You keep saying that," I said, shaking. "Too young to understand, too naive to question, too quiet to matter." "You didn't just lie about her, you used her absence to control me." He took a step forward, lowering his voice. "You don't know what it was like raising you alone." I laughed bitterly. Alone. "You had Vanessa before the ink on the divorce papers was dry. You replaced Mom, then you replaced me." His eyes flashed. "Watch your tone." Why, I said, tears spilling over. "You can't control me anymore." Vanessa's heels clicked in the doorway. "Charles, maybe we should—" "Not now." He snapped, glaring at her. She froze, caught between fear and pride. I saw it then, the same fear my mother must have seen, the way he needed to dominate every room, every conversation. "You always rewrite the story, don't you?" I said softly. "You made Mom the villain, me, the inconvenience, and yourself the savior." He looked at me with something close to pity. "You'll see someday. When you're older, when you have children, you'll understand the sacrifices I made. Stop saying that I shouted. You sacrificed truth for comfort. You sacrificed family for image." My voice broke. "You don't get to hide behind love when everything you did was about control." The silence that followed was unbearable. He finally sat back down, his expression unreadable. "What do you want from me, Clara? An apology?" I met his gaze, my voice steady. "No, I want accountability." I reached into my bag and pulled out a flash drive. Mom's lawyer gave me everything: court records, letters, financial documents. "I know you manipulated her case, and I know you hid her attempts to contact me." His composure cracked for the first time. "You don't know what you're doing," he said, standing abruptly. If you take this public, you'll destroy what's left of this family." I held his gaze. What family? Vanessa whispered his name, but he didn't hear her. His world, his carefully curated empire, was trembling. I took a deep breath. You once told me I'd understand someday, and I do now. I understand that love without truth is manipulation. I understand that silence can be abuse. I turned toward the door, and I understand that sometimes justice isn't revenge, it's freedom. His voice cracked behind me. "Clara, please." I paused but didn't turn around. "You'll have to live with what you did, Dad, just like Mom had to live without me." As I stepped outside, Vanessa's eyes met mine. For the first time, her expression wasn't smug. It was terrified, because she knew that everything he built on lies was about to collapse. And for once, I wasn't the one standing outside. He was. 2 weeks after the confrontation, the truth finally found its voice. It started quietly like a tremor beneath the surface. I had sent the documents and letters to a journalist named Grace Lowell, a woman Aunt Linda knew from her work at the local newspaper. Grace listened carefully as I told her everything from my father's deception to my mother's hidden letters to the abandonment at the wedding hall. She didn't interrupt, only asked for evidence. When I handed her the flash drive, she said softly, "You understand what this will do, right?" I nodded. It already did. I just want the rest of the world to see it too. A week later, the headline appeared online, "The Perfect Family That Wasn't Tech CEO's Hidden Custody Scandal." My father's photo smiling beside Vanessa sat beneath it. The article detailed his manipulation of the custody battle, his lies about my mother's death, and even the legal documents showing he had intercepted her letters. Grace didn't sensationalize, she just told the truth. Within hours, it went viral. Former colleagues, investors, even friends of Vanessa began sharing it. Hashtags trended, comment sections filled with outrage. How could a father do this? That poor girl. Imagine growing up believing your mother abandoned you. Vanessa released a statement first, a cold attempt at damage control. These claims are exaggerated. My husband acted in good faith during a difficult time, but it only fueled more fury. By evening, my father's company issued a press release announcing his temporary leave of absence. For once, his silence was louder than any speech. Aunt Linda and I watched the news together that night. She squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing, Clara. This isn't vengeance. It's truth finally breathing." But part of me felt hollow. Justice was supposed to feel like victory. Instead, it felt like mourning. Mourning the father I thought I had, the childhood I lost. A few days later, I received a message from an unknown number. It was Vanessa. "You've ruined everything she wrote. I hope you're happy." I stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it. Because for once, I didn't owe anyone an explanation. That weekend, I visited my mother's grave for the first time since learning the truth. The cemetery was quiet, tucked under a canopy of oak trees. I knelt before her headstone, tracing the engraved letters with my fingertips. "Mom," I whispered, "I wish you could see it. Everyone finally knows what he did. They know you tried." The wind rustled through the branches, soft and warm, like an unseen embrace. "I wish I'd known you," I continued, my voice trembling. "I wish I'd had the chance to tell you I don't blame you. You were fighting battles I didn't understand." For the first time in years, my tears didn't feel like weakness. They felt like release. When I stood, the sun was setting, the sky painted in shades of gold and rose. It felt like a promise. The following Monday, I received another letter, this one from my father. The handwriting was familiar, but the tone was different. "Clara," it began, "I don't expect forgiveness. The article destroyed everything I built, but maybe that's what needed to happen. I see now that truth doesn't die when buried, it waits. And now it's my turn to face it. I've stepped down from the company. Vanessa has left. The silence is unbearable, but maybe it's what I deserve. I know you may never speak to me again, but please remember, I did love you even if I didn't know how to show it." I folded the letter and sat with it for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just breathed, because this time I was free to decide what came next. I slipped the letter into my mother's journal, a full circle of truth, lies, and forgiveness, incomplete but possible. And as I walked home through the fading light, I realized something vital. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your story from the hands that tried to rewrite it. And mine was finally mine again. The following months were a storm of consequences. The company my father built his empire, his pride collapsed under the weight of scandal. Investors withdrew, board members resigned, and newspapers picked apart every corner of his once spotless reputation. For decades, he had crafted the image of a visionary, a philanthropist, a family man. Now the world saw what I had seen outside that wedding hall, a man who valued appearances more than truth. Vanessa filed for divorce 3 months later, citing irreconcilable differences. I read about it online in an article that felt like poetic justice. The woman who once told me I didn't fit the picture had now become a blemish herself in his story. But this time, there was no one left for him to blame. He sold the mansion, moved into a smaller home near Santa Barbara, and faded quietly from public life. The first letter came in early autumn. It was handwritten shaky, the ink blotched like the writer had hesitated too long between words. "Clara," it began, "I saw your interview. You spoke with such grace, strong but fair. I didn't deserve that kindness. I replay everything in my mind, wondering how I became the kind of man who could look at his child and still choose silence. If there's anything left in you that remembers the good, please visit. I won't ask for forgiveness. Just a conversation." I didn't respond immediately. The part of me that still hurt wanted to ignore him forever, to let time punish him in ways I couldn't. But the part that remembered the father who once sang Beatles songs while making pancakes knew closure doesn't come from silence. So, 2 weeks later, I went. His new home was small, modest, the garden unkempt, as if he'd stopped caring about impressions. He opened the door slowly, thinner than I remembered his hair, now almost completely gray. For a long moment, we just looked at each other, two people bound by history, but separated by choices. "You came," he whispered, his voice trembling. I nodded. "You asked for a conversation." Inside, the house smelled faintly of old books and regret. We sat across from each other, a worn coffee table between us. "You lost everything," I said, quietly. "Company, reputation, marriage." He gave a weak smile. "Everything except the guilt." He looked down at his hands, the same hands that once tucked me into bed. I thought power would protect me from my failures, but it only made them louder. I thought I could control love by controlling people. He looked up, his eyes red. "You were right, Clara. I didn't protect you. I protected my image." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth about Mom?" His voice cracked. "Because I was ashamed. She left me first, not you, not really me, but my pride couldn't stand that. So I rewrote the story. I made her the villain, you the victim, and me the savior. But lies grow like rot, and by the time I realized how deep it went, it was too late. Silence hung heavy between us, filled with years of what-ifs. I wanted to hate him, to throw every wound back in his face, but the man before me wasn't the monster I remembered. He was broken, stripped of the armor that had made him untouchable. "You can't fix the past," I said finally, "but you can face it. That's all I ever wanted." He nodded, tears sliding down his cheeks. "I don't expect you to stay in my life. I just needed to see you before I leave this world, knowing you're free." For the first time in years, I reached out and took his hand. "You should have done that years ago," I whispered. He laughed softly, the sound cracked but real. "I know. When I left that day, I didn't look back, not because of anger, but because some doors once closed no longer need to be reopened. Behind me was a man finally meeting his reckoning. Ahead of me was the quiet peace of a life unchained from his shadow. A year after that final visit, I stood again at my mother's grave, the wind gentle against my hair, the scent of sea salt drifting through the trees. I had brought fresh lilies this time, the kind she once painted in watercolor when I was small. The headstone looked softer in the morning light, less like a wound and more like a doorway. "It's over now, Mom," I whispered. "He's gone." My father had passed quietly 3 months earlier, a heart attack in his sleep. There was no press coverage, no eulogies filled with praise, only a small private service attended by Aunt Linda, a few distant relatives, and me. The man who once filled auditoriums with his ambition left behind only the echo of his regrets. In the weeks after his death, I'd gone through his things expecting more lies, but what I found was different. In a small wooden box marked, "For Clara," there were dozens of letters, unsent drafts of apologies. Some were messy, others half-written as if he couldn't quite find the courage to finish them. The last one was dated 2 weeks before he died. I spent half my life trying to build a legacy people would remember he wrote. But the only legacy that matters is the one I destroyed by losing you. I hope someday your heart finds the peace mine never could. I folded the letter gently, tears falling freely. He had finally understood too late, but somehow it still mattered. Grief, I learned, is rarely clean. It weaves itself through forgiveness and fury, through relief and sorrow. But as I stood there at his graveside, I realized something vital letting go doesn't mean pretending it never happened. It means deciding it won't happen again. I used the settlement money from his company, the funds he'd left entirely to me, to start something new, the Hayes Foundation for Lost Voices, a nonprofit that provided legal aid and counseling to children caught in toxic custody battles. Every case, every story I read felt like another small way of giving my mother the justice she never received and giving my younger self the voice she never had. Aunt Linda became my partner in running the organization. She once joked, "You're turning pain into purpose, kiddo. That's how you win." And maybe she was right. The work was hard, often heartbreaking, but it healed something in me. The first time a 16-year-old girl hugged me after her court hearing and whispered, "Thank you for believing me," I cried in the car for an hour afterward, because I finally understood I wasn't defined by what they did to me, but by what I chose to do next. Years passed. I married a man named Daniel, gentle and patient in all the ways my father never was. When our daughter was born, I named her Margaret. The first time I held her tiny and perfect, I made a silent vow she would never doubt that she was loved. On quiet nights when Daniel and Margaret were asleep, I would sometimes sit on the porch with my mother's old journal in my lap, rereading her words. I no longer cried when I saw her handwriting. Instead, I smiled, knowing that somewhere, somehow, she'd see what became of her daughter, the one who found her way back from silence. The past never vanished, but it no longer defined me. It became a compass pointing toward truth. One afternoon, years later, I received an email from a young journalist who had read the original story about my father. "Your courage helped me confront my own family," she wrote. "Thank you for showing that healing isn't revenge, it's reclamation." I stared at the words for a long time before replying simply, "We all find our way through the wreckage." I just shared mine. Standing again before my mother's grave that day, I placed both his and her letters beneath the lilies. "You were both flawed," I said softly, "but I learned from you. I learned what love shouldn't be and what it can be." The wind rustled warm and forgiving, and for the first time I felt no anger, no emptiness, only peace. As I walked away, the ocean glittered in the distance like a new beginning, and I realized something my mother had tried to teach me all along. Family isn't about who leaves or who stays. It's about who returns to themselves after the storm, and I had finally come home.